They erased me from his will. Said I was unstable, unfit, forgettable. But they didn't know I remembered everything. The forged papers, the baby they cost me, the empire they stole. Now I'm back, pregnant, powerful, and holding the real will. And this time I'm the one doing the rewriting. There's a moment just before death where everything slows. The heartbeat. The thoughts. Even the pain stops fighting. Mine came in the corner room of St. Adrian's psychiatric care. Curtains drawn. Cameras off. Medication administered by a woman I'd never seen before. Her badge missing, her eyes empty. She held out a paper cup of pills like she was offering communion. "Open, Mrs. Moore," she said sweetly. Mrs. Moore. The name felt like a bruise. I opened my mouth. I swallowed. Not because I trusted her, but because I no longer had the strength not to. The taste was familiar. Bitter. I'd been on a cocktail of drugs for weeks now. Some to calm me, others to dull me. But this one was different. My throat burned. My chest tightened. And as the edges of my vision blurred and turned dark, I knew. This wasn't sedation. This was goodbye. I never screamed. What was the point? No one had listened when I begged them before. Not the doctors who labeled me unstable. Not the lawyers who questioned my will. And certainly not the man I once trusted above all others. Thomas More. My husband. My executioner. He had held my hand at his father's funeral. Played the grieving son. Worn black. Sung hymns. But just hours later he stood beside her, Ava Sinclair, reading the will that cut me out of everything I'd helped build. "She's been unwell lately," he said softly to the board as if I couldn't hear him. Dad didn't want her burdened. Ava had smiled politely and squeezed his hand under the table. My shares. My home. My name. All swept into a legal document, rewritten just days before Richard Moore died. The patriarch of the Moore family. A man who once called me the daughter he never had. Until Ava became the one writing the contracts. The world around me dissolved. I felt cold, but not from death. From rage. From humiliation. From the knowledge that I had died in a place where no one would mourn me. No funeral. No flowers. No one to question the overdose. And as my final thought cracked like glass behind my eyes, I whispered into the silence of my mind. If I could do it again. A sharp cry tore through the air. Loud. Wet. Piercing. I opened my eyes. And immediately forgot how to breathe. Fluorescent lights. Polished tile floors. A nurse hurrying by with a clipboard. The scent of antiseptic and blood. But most jarring, my hands. My fingers. Strong. Taken. Steady. No bruises. No restraints. I was in a hospital room. But not a psychiatric ward. My lips trembled as I sat upright, lungs straining like I hadn't used them in years. "Elena, take it slow." The voice. The familiarity of it stopped me cold. I turned toward it. And there he stood. Thomas. Younger. Smiling. Wearing the navy wool coat I bought him last Christmas. His face relaxed, eyes glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. He was holding a newborn. The baby was swaddled in a blue blanket. Pink cheeks. Full head of dark hair. Eyes squeezed shut, mouth wide open, screaming for the world to hear him. Beside them was Ava. Exhausted, radiant, and flushed with post-labor pride. She looked every bit the glowing new mother. What the hell was happening? "Elena." Thomas approached cautiously, the baby in his arms. "You passed out when the doctor announced the birth. You feeling all right?" I blinked. "What?" My voice cracked. "Bro." Ava smiled at me. "It's okay. You're overwhelmed. It's a beautiful moment for all of us. All of us." No. This couldn't be real. This was the day Richard Moore died. This was the exact moment Ava gave birth. And Thomas announced to the board that the baby was his and his late father's legacy. I had lived this. 6 months later I had died for it. No. I was back. I sat there frozen watching Thomas rock the baby. He held him close as if this child was precious. And in his eyes I saw something I had never noticed before. Not until my second death. Guilt. No. Not guilt. Possessiveness. Like the baby was currency. Power. A golden anchor to the Moore name. Ava. She didn't look at Thomas the way new mothers looked at their husbands. She looked at him like a co-conspirator. Smug. Secure. I tried to remember what happened on this day. This exact hospital room. The cries of congratulations. The board members who sent flowers. The attorney who said the revised will had already been processed. The one that excluded me. Because I was sick. Because I was unstable. Because Ava had forged medical reports under my name and Thomas had stood behind her, nodding in agreement. Because I had trusted them both. Elena. Thomas asked again. Do you want to hold him? I looked at the baby. My throat burned. I hadn't even cried at my own death. But now my tears came hot and fast. I shook my head slowly. No, I whispered. I just need a moment. He didn't argue. He turned to coo at the baby. And I watched. Watched the two people who had ended my life. The man I married. The woman I welcomed into our home. And I remembered everything. I remembered the pills, the falsified doctor's notes, the isolation. I remembered the will, how Thomas assured me Richard had left me nothing, and how Ava had consoled me with lavender tea and a tight-lipped smile. I remembered how no one came to visit. How I had been erased like a chalk name on wet pavement. And I remembered that I had no power. Till now. I stood up, legs wobbling. Elena. Ava asked. Are you all right? I need air, I said, my voice trembling. She nodded, too tired to follow me. Thomas was busy staring at the baby as if his entire legacy lived in those tiny fists. Good. Let them watch each other. Let them think I was still the same broken woman they once destroyed. Let them believe they'd already won. Because what they didn't know was this. The woman they buried 6 feet under had just walked back into the room. And this time I wasn't here to cry. I was here to ruin them. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? While Thomas paced the hospital room with the baby in his arms and Ava dozed off with a self-satisfied smile, I sat in the window seat, eyes wide open, mind burning. This wasn't just a second chance at life. This was a loaded gun placed gently in my hands, aimed squarely at the two people who had buried me alive. I didn't need to rush. They had already underestimated me once. I'd let them do it again. But this time I would be the one writing the script. The first thing I needed was proof. Not of their affair. Not even of the baby's paternity. That would come later. Right now, I needed to unravel the rope they once tied around my throat. My mental health records. Because in the last timeline, that's how they won. They declared me unwell, hysterical, delusional. Signed off by a doctor I had only met once at a gala. He'd looked me up and down like I was some shattered bird, then smiled with a diagnosis already forming in his mouth. I still remembered the words on the file they waved at the board meeting like it was gospel. Unfit to manage estate decisions due to emotional volatility. If I was going to burn them this time, I had to start with the matches they once used against me. 2 days after Ava's discharge, while Thomas fussed over her postpartum diet and board meetings, I made my first move. Thomas, I said gently at breakfast, stirring my tea, I think I need to see Dr. Halbert again. He looked up from his emails, half surprised. Halbert? Why? I haven't been feeling like myself, I lied smoothly. And after fainting at the hospital, I just want to make sure it's not hormonal. His brow relaxed. He nodded. Good idea. I'll have Ava text you the clinic info. Of course he would. They were already lining things up again. I smiled and added honey to my tea. Good. Let them think I was walking straight into the same trap. 3 days later, I entered the sleek, private mental wellness clinic in uptown Manhattan. The receptionist greeted me like she had known me for years. Elena Moore, she chirped. Dr. Halbert will see you in just a moment. I nodded, palms damp, heart steady. This was the same office where he'd signed the papers that cost me my freedom. The same sterile-smelling lobby where Thomas once hugged me after a checkup and told me I was doing the right thing by getting help. The irony almost made me laugh. This time I wasn't here for help. I was here for answers. Dr. Halbert's office hadn't changed. Still cold, modern, and smug, just like the man behind the desk. He smiled when he saw me. Elena. I must say I'm glad to see you. You're looking much more stable. I let the insult pass. I sank into the leather chair and smiled faintly. I've been thinking a lot about last year. I never really understood why my health records were used in Richard's estate filing. Ah. He folded his hands, cautious now. That was between your husband and the legal team, I believe. I was only asked to do a professional evaluation. An evaluation you completed in 30 minutes, I said quietly. He shifted. I leaned forward, voice even. You know what's strange, doctor? You signed off on a diagnosis that labeled me emotionally unfit, even though I'd never undergone a single formal test. There's no cognitive workup. No clinical history. Not even a follow-up. He blinked. Your husband, Thomas, shared your symptoms. Emotional episodes. Paranoia. Dissociation. I trusted his account. And Ava. He froze. There was. He hadn't expected me to know. You used her affidavit too, didn't you? He opened his mouth. Closed it. I can't confirm that. I pulled out a flash drive from my coat pocket and set it gently on the table. That's a recording of our last session. It proves your notes were altered after our visit. Handwriting experts will have a field day. His face drained of color. I smiled sweetly. I'm not pressing charges, I said, standing. Not yet. But I do need something from you. By the time I left the office, I had a signed statement in hand. Not a confession, but an admission of procedural error, and that my diagnosis had been given under external, emotional influence. It would be enough for now. But I wasn't finished. Next, I needed someone I could trust. Someone from the life I'd abandoned when I married Thomas and joined the Moore dynasty. I hadn't been back to the hospital in 5 years. It was surreal walking into that old emergency wing where I once wore scrubs and gave orders. The staff had changed. New nurses, new interns. But the smell, the mix of antiseptic, metal, and sweat hadn't. Neither had Dr. Ian Brooks. He spotted me instantly walking out of the cardiac unit. His sleeves rolled. Clipboard under his arm. Hair grayer now but still sharp-eyed and tall. Elena, he said, stunned. I stepped into his path, feeling an unexpected flutter of nerves. Hi, Ian. His eyes softened. By God. I thought you'd left the country. Not quite. Just lost touch. His smile faded into something more cautious. I heard things. Of course he had. They'd painted me unstable. Rumors must have spread like fire in hospital gossip halls. I was sick, I said softly. But not in the way they told you. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. I never believed it. I blinked. I saw your resignation letter, he continued. Typed. Soulless. It wasn't your voice. I knew something was off. Warmth touched my ribs like a cracked light bulb trying to glow. I need your help, I whispered. His brow lifted. Medical. Legal. Pause. Then, come with me. We walked into his office. I waited until the door clicked shut. And then I told him everything. Not the time travel, of course, he was a cardiologist, not a lunatic whisperer. But I laid out the truth as plainly as I could. The falsified diagnosis. The rewritten will. My removal from the board. The isolation. The silent burial. I told him about Ava. The fake psychiatric records. The forged affidavits. How they'd rewritten history, page by page, until there was no Elena Moore left in the story. By the end, Ian's hands were clenched into fists. I can't believe this, he muttered. Actually, no, I can. That family always reeked of manipulation. I smiled weakly. Thomas was charming when he wanted to be. His jaw tightened. He also took the best trauma surgeon I'd ever worked with and turned her into a ghost. My throat closed. I looked away. I can help, he said. But this has to be quiet. I know. That's why I'm not using lawyers yet. Everything needs to come from the inside. He nodded slowly. We have a legal team that works with medical misconduct. Discreetly. If we can prove Ava coerced your diagnosis or tampered with records. They'll fall, I finished. He offered me his hand. I took it. Just like that, I had my first ally. That night, I stood in front of the mirror at the Moore estate, brushing my hair. Ava's perfume wafted down the hallway. Lavender and white musk. Thomas laughed softly in the distance, murmuring something about the baby's eyes. I stared at my reflection. Same face. Same scars. But the woman in the mirror was no longer soft. She wasn't broken. She was awake. The first time they wrote me out of the story. This time, I'm writing it back in. You'd be surprised how easily people ignore you once they believe you're broken. A week after Ava returned from the hospital, she moved into the Moore estate like she'd always belonged. The staff adjusted quickly, too quickly. Her preferences replaced mine in the pantry, her name on the delivery slips, her framed photos sneaking onto the bookshelves that once held mine and Richard's. Thomas didn't ask. He didn't even explain. He just began referring to her as family. I said nothing. I played my part. The loyal wife, the doting stepmother figure, the slightly fragile woman just happy to be included again. I smiled through dinners, nodded at board meeting conversations I was no longer invited to, and gently placed warm towels over Ava's swollen feet when guests were present. The same guests who whispered behind their napkins, wondering when Elena Moore had become so soft, so absent. Let them wonder. Let them believe the performance. Because while they smiled at Ava's effortless takeover, I was quietly laying mines beneath the floorboards. I started with the West Wing. No one had used Richard's private study since the funeral. The double doors remained locked. But I knew the old passcode. 1109, his wedding anniversary. A small detail Ava would never have bothered to remember. The moment I stepped in, I almost choked. The scent of leather-bound books, rich mahogany, and aged cigar smoke wrapped around me like a ghost. His chair was still pushed back at the perfect angle. Dust had gathered in the grooves of the globe he used to spin during heated phone calls. And beneath his desk? Exactly what I hoped for. A silver-black recorder. Still intact. Richard had been paranoid, especially toward the end. Thomas thought his father's obsession with surveillance was a sign of dementia. I knew better. Richard didn't trust anyone, not even his son. Especially not Ava. I rewound the last audio file with trembling fingers. It began with the soft click of heels. A woman's voice, sharp, smug. She believes I'm her friend, you know. She thinks I actually care. Thomas's voice followed, amused. Elena always did have a savior complex. You play damsel well. My body went rigid. Ava laughed. By the time she realizes she won't even have access to her own medication list. You're a genius, Thomas chuckled. I should have married you first. Another laugh. Louder this time. And give up all the fun of watching her spiral? I paused the recorder, bow rising in my throat. So it hadn't just been betrayal. It was sport. They had toyed with me like a cat does with a dying mouse. I hit save, copied the file onto a fresh flash drive and then another. One I stored in my jewelry box. One I mailed to a P.O. box I'd registered under a fake name, Anna Lively. Because if they ever caught on to what I was doing, I needed failsafes. And this time I wouldn't let myself be silenced. My next move involved the one thing they hadn't thought to strip from me. My original equity shares in the Moore family legacy. While they altered Richard's will to exclude me, the business shares I inherited from my late father, backed by early investments in Moore Global, were still mine. Technically, Thomas had access to manage them, but not to sell or reassign without my consent. So I made sure he couldn't. I created a legal trust under the name Anna Lively. The trustee? A firm based in Zurich. Clean. Silent. Ironclad. Using the quietest channels possible, through Ian's connections, I transferred 49% of my holdings into the trust. Not enough to tip them off. Just enough to stall any moves Thomas might try to make if he sensed a power shift. The rest I left alone for now. Let them think they still had access. They'd find out otherwise at just the right moment. Ava's personal laptop was next. She rarely let it out of her sight, kept it tucked into a leather bag like it held her soul. Which in a way it did. Every spreadsheet, contract, and legal maneuver tied to the revised will was in that device. And I wanted it. But to get to it I needed someone close to her. Someone overlooked. Her assistant, Lacey Quinn. Early 20s. Nervous. The perfect target. Lacey accompanied Ava everywhere, carried her files, prepped her lunch smoothies and guarded that laptop like a terrier. But she was also clearly exhausted. Overworked. Tense. All it took was one offer. You look pale, sweetheart. Let me make you some chamomile tea. I crushed a quarter dose of a mild muscle relaxant into the blend. Nothing dangerous, just enough to dull her alertness and fog her memory. 15 minutes later, Lacey was asleep on the couch in the sunroom, her tablet slipping from her lap. I took Ava's leather bag gently from the floor. And I ran. I had exactly 17 minutes before anyone noticed. I sprinted across the garden path, unlocked the back entrance of Richard's study, and pulled the laptop from the bag. I inserted a flash drive and launched the extraction script Ian had given me. The files began pouring in, one by one. Dozens of documents labeled with legal case numbers, estate amendments, bank transfers. And then I saw them. Psycheval under Elena more under 2022 under Albert.docs. Got you. The loading bar crawled like a stubborn snail. 12 minutes left. Outside the window I heard a maid calling for Lacey. Come on, come on. File 84 of 97. 85. 86. The maid's voice got louder. I pressed the screen gently, whispering, "Don't you dare freeze on me." File 92. 93. Complete. I ejected the drive just as I heard the knock on the study door. Elena? Are you in there? It was Ava. I slid the flash drive into my waistband, dropped the laptop back into the bag and opened the door with a warm smile. I was just looking for one of Richard's notebooks. I had a memory of him scribbling something important about the company's tax policy. Sorry if I worried you. She looked past me, eyes narrowed. Did you touch anything else? No, I lied smoothly. Should I have? She softened. No, of course not. You're just not usually in this wing anymore. Thought I'd visit the past, I said with a wistful sigh. After all, this used to be mine too. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for a second too long. I brushed past her and returned the bag to the sunroom before Lacey could wake up. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and opened the drive. File by file, I scanned what Ava had been hiding. Oh, the first will, signed and witnessed with my name intact. Oh, the second, altered without Richard's fingerprint approval. My medical diagnosis, edited post-submission with Ava's initials on the metadata log. But one file stopped me cold. A text document titled, Post-Elena Strategy Draft 3. I opened it. Once Elena is fully removed from the estate, initiate rebranding phase. Ava to assume public-facing roles. Thomas to take full executive control. Remove Elena from press references. Transfer any remaining sentimental property to storage. Possible psychiatric relapse narrative if media inquiry occurs. Endgame, Ava and Thomas married by Q4. Ava hadn't just wanted my role. She wanted my name erased. I stood in front of the vanity mirror, shaking. Not with fear. With fury. They had rehearsed my extinction like a PR rollout. But I was still here. Breathing. Thinking. Watching. A wife forgotten. A widow resurrected. And this time I wouldn't just be present. I would be unforgettable. The deeper I dug into the files I extracted from Ava's laptop, the harder it became to breathe. I'd expected cold transactions. Legal rewrites. Maybe a quiet effort to phase me out of the Moore estate. But what I found was a full-blown campaign. Not just to remove me but to replace me. Strategically. Legally. Socially. Their timeline was clinical. Entries marked with initials, cross-referenced with date-stamped folders, correspondence with Richard's legal team, even manipulated psychiatric files with my forged digital signature. And in the folder titled Legacy Files Secured, I found something that stopped my breath cold. A series of scanned receipts, reservation confirmations and email threads, all coded, but unmistakably damning. The subject line read, Room service receipt November 2020 T&A Suite 406 Rosewood Hotel. The date on that file. 6 months before I ever suspected the affair. A full year before Ava moved into the estate. I opened the email attached. Thank you for your stay. As requested, your suite remained private. No name record beyond initials was used, per your VIP preferences. Below that, a booking confirmation. Guest initials, TM and AS. Duration 3 nights. Notes, no front desk check-ins. Deliver champagne and strawberries on arrival. I clicked through 2 more matching receipts. Different cities. Same initials. It wasn't just a fling. It was long-term. Coordinated. And it had started long before Richard Moore's health began to decline. They hadn't fallen into love. They had planned it. I closed the file and leaned back in the chair, my heart thudding in a slow, steady rhythm. Everything in my old life had felt like it came undone so fast. But it hadn't. They had been unraveling me one thread at a time. Quietly. Systematically. The affair was bad enough. But then I opened the folder labeled Revised _drafts, and saw the dates. The earliest version? Time-stamped 4 weeks before Richard's stroke. Ava had been working with his attorney, Richard's former estate lawyer, while he was still lucid, but clearly compromised. The documents showed incremental updates, each one taking away more from me, consolidating more under Thomas's future control, with Ava named as special executor in the final draft. And the last version? Signed 2 days after Richard was admitted to ICU. Sedated. Nonverbal. Slipping. There was no way he could have legally approved anything by then. The file metadata hadn't even been scrubbed. That's how confident they were. Or maybe just careless. Because dead people don't investigate digital timestamps. Except I wasn't dead anymore. I opened the flash drive I'd been hiding since that night in Richard's private study. Inside was the original will, the one I'd backed up secretly when I saw the document on his desk just days before he passed. I remembered thinking something felt off. I didn't know then what. I do now. That file showed my rightful inheritance. 40% of more global shares. A joint ownership of the foundation. The estate. A personal letter of intent from Richard naming me the moral compass of this family. It wasn't just generous. It was public recognition of everything I'd done to hold this dynasty together. They'd buried that document and replaced it with one that called me unstable and unfit. I needed someone to verify it. Someone with professional weight, clean credentials, and no ties to Thomas or Ava. There was only one person I trusted with that kind of power. I waited until late afternoon to text him. Can we meet? Somewhere private. I have something you need to see. Ian responded within minutes. The old lecture hall at St. Vincent's. Room 4C. I'll be there in 30. My fingers trembled slightly as I put on my coat. Ava was in the solarium pretending to read parenting books. Thomas was upstairs on another call about estate, succession restructuring. Neither noticed me leave. I'd perfected invisibility again. But this time I wore it like armor. St. Vincent's had once been my home. Before the Moore name was stitched into everything I did. Before I gave up my white coat for a life of cocktail parties, charity galas, and backroom negotiations. Room 4C still smelled of dry erase markers and floor wax. Ian was waiting at the end of the row, coat draped over the back of the chair, eyes alert. You came alone? I asked quietly. He nodded. Always. I sat beside him and plugged in the flash drive. As the files loaded, his brow furrowed. What am I looking at? Metadata, I replied. Modified legal drafts. Some digitally signed under questionable conditions. Others retroactively adjusted after the person who supposedly signed them was already sedated. Ian leaned in, scrolling carefully. His eyes flicked to the dates. These are will drafts. Every single one. He looked at me. I need a witness, I said, with no stake. Someone who understands chain of custody. Who can verify the integrity of these timestamps and support that Richard couldn't have possibly approved the final version. Ian was quiet for a long moment. Then, you want to challenge the will. I want to take back my life, I said. And them. I stared ahead at the blank chalkboard. They'll go down with it. Back at the estate, Ava and Thomas were planning a naming ceremony for the baby. A small curated guest list. Just family, a few investors, the PR firm. Elena, Thomas called across the dining room, we want you to sit next to the baby during the blessing. It'll show unity. Unity. I walked over, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and smiled. Of course, I said sweetly. That's what families are for. Ava beamed like she had just won another game. And I let her believe it. She had no idea that room 4C now held the receipts of everything she'd stolen. No clue that her version of the truth, hand-stitched over months of lies, was about to be torn wide open. That night I hid the verified files in a fireproof safe behind my old piano. Ian had added his certification, notarized and sealed. It wasn't time to use them. Not yet. They still thought they were in control. But that would change. Because while Ava rewrote history, she forgot to delete the drafts. And while she built her legacy on fraud and seduction, I was building my case on facts and blood. It was almost midnight when Ian called. I read through every word, he said. You were right. They thought you'd never live long enough to notice the edits. I'm still reading, I replied. Now I want to write the ending. Pause. Then, can I ask you something, Elena? Not as a witness. As someone who used to know you. His voice was soft. Familiar. Dangerous. Why did you really quit surgery? I met him the next morning at a walking path behind St. Vincent's. The same one interns used to sneak off to when they needed to cry after a failed code. The air was cold, leaves brittle underfoot. We walked slowly side by side just like we used to. He didn't press me. He just waited. So I gave it to him. The first time I considered quitting, I began, was the night I had to reschedule surgery prep to attend a more board dinner. Ian glanced at me but didn't speak. Thomas called it a small favor. Just a dinner, just one patient delay. But it became 2, then 5. And suddenly, the morning after Samuel Klein submitted the preliminary challenge to the probate court, Ian texted me just 2 words. No. I met him in the old staff garden behind St. Vincent's Hospital. A private, overlooked spot where we used to share post-surgery tea in paper cups and laughter that smelled like antiseptic and adrenaline. Now we sat across from each other in silence, the city morning buzzing beyond the hedges while the steam from our drinks curled between us. Ian looked at me differently today. Like he saw past the armor. You really filed it, he said quietly. I nodded. The first of many. He let out a low breath. I spent all night reading through the metadata again. Your instincts were surgical. You know that, right? I used to. He tilted his head. Elena, why did you quit surgery? I met his eyes and this time I didn't lie. It wasn't burnout, I said. At least not the kind they write about in journals. Ian didn't interrupt. I left because Thomas asked me to, I said flatly. No, he never had to say the words. He just started planting the seeds. Telling me I looked tired. That I should rest. That patients made me too emotional. That I was becoming distracted in the OR. That he needed a wife who could help the family more directly. You believed him? I gave a bitter smile. I believed that love meant sacrificing what didn't fit. Ian looked away for a moment. You were one of the best surgeons in our program. The way you handled that GSW trauma in 16, no one else would have thought to clamp the artery that way. I remember that day, I whispered. I also remember coming home late, blood on my scrubs, proud, only to have Thomas say, couldn't you have made it to the board dinner first? Ian's jaw tightened. Every time I chose medicine, I continued, Thomas punished me with distance. Coldness. Withheld affection. So I chose him. Over and over. Until there was nothing left of me but pearls and silence. His voice was low. I hated watching it happen. You fading like that. I met his gaze. Then help me finish the story properly. That afternoon I walked into the Moore Foundation building under a gray sky with a calm face and thunder in my chest. Thomas was in a closed-door meeting about press engagement for the baby's naming ceremony. Ava was out for a facial. Perfect. I took the private elevator to the legal floor. No cameras in that hallway. Richard had insisted on it years ago after a data breach. Some traditions, it turns out, age well. I used my old credentials, still active because they never thought I'd dare return. The receptionist, a fresh-faced girl with red nails and no institutional memory, looked up. Can I help you? I'm here to review the archives, I said warmly. Trust department. She blinked. Do you have an appointment? No. But I have clearance. She hesitated, then checked her screen. Oh. Right. Elena Moore, internal trustee. Still in the system. I smiled. Exactly. He waved me in. I entered the archive room like I used to when I helped Richard review compliance reports. Back when I was considered the moral check of the Moore legacy. Before Ava. Before Thomas decided I was more useful mute. I scanned the shelf until I found what I needed. Trust number 0432B. Reallocation Authority. Inside were copies of every fund movement Thomas and Ava had filed since Richard's hospitalization. I found 3 signatures I'd supposedly signed. All dated within 2 days of each other. All in ink I never touched. All filed under a clause Ava had quietly added in the revised will. I photographed everything. That evening, I returned to the estate to find Ava in the garden, posing for photographs with the baby in her arms. She wore white chiffon, her hair curled in soft waves. A stylist crouched beside her adjusting her hemline while Thomas directed the lighting crew. I watched them from the veranda. They looked like a family. Perfect. Pure. Curated. I wondered how many photos it took to hide betrayal. Elena, Ava called cheerfully when she noticed me. Come hold the baby for a shot. We're doing 3 generations. I walked toward her, heels tapping slowly on the stone. Actually, I said smoothly, I just spoke with Samuel. He said the court filing went through. Discovery will begin soon. A beat of silence. Thomas straightened. Discovery. Kept my tone light. Yes. For the will. It's being challenged, remember? You'll be expected to produce the original signed version, doctor evaluations, any supporting estate documents. Ava's smile froze. I tilted my head. You do still have the originals, don't you? Her eyes narrowed just slightly. We've been through this. That will was legitimate. Wonderful, I said sweetly. Then you won't mind showing it to a judge. The photographer looked between us, confused. I turned away and walked back toward the house, smiling to myself as Ava hissed something urgent behind me. Let them scramble. Let them sweat. They built an empire on forged stone. All I had to do was tap it. Ian called later that night. She forged 3 trust signatures. We have handwriting comparison from your medical forms. And I checked. Your passport shows you were in Toronto the week she filed them. Think it'll hold? He paused. It won't just hold. It'll collapse everything they built. A long silence followed. You okay? He asked. I don't know yet, I said truthfully. But I'm awake. And I'm not going back. 2 days later, the probate court sent notice of hearing. The Moore estate would be formally questioned under fraud suspicion. Samuel emailed me the moment it was confirmed. It begins. I stared at the message, then at the old diamond necklace I once wore the night Thomas proposed. Back then I thought love was the crown I'd won. Now I understood, it was the weight I had carried. But not anymore. There was a time I would have given anything to carry a child into this world. And for one brief flickering moment, I did. I still remember the trembling joy when the test turned positive. I hadn't told Thomas yet. I wanted to wait until the board meetings were over, until he wasn't traveling, until we could celebrate it properly. But that day never came. Instead, Ava did. She noticed it before anyone else did. The way I clutched my stomach protectively. How I turned away from wine at dinner. The way I disappeared to the bathroom mid-meal, discreetly sick. You look pale, she said one morning. Are you eating enough? I nodded, quietly brushing off the question. But that night Thomas canceled dinner. Then again the next. Then again. Board meetings became longer. His moods sharper. Ava's presence, louder. She began planning events at the estate. Piling responsibilities onto my calendar. Hosting dinners with wine I couldn't drink. Staging stress like it was a performance and I was her lead actress. Until one morning I woke to a stain on the bedsheets and pain I couldn't unfeel. The baby was gone. The doctor called it stress-induced. I knew better. I never told Thomas. I didn't see the point. Grief makes you silent when your pain is invisible to the one who caused it. But now in this new timeline, I was pregnant again. And this time, I was telling no one. I kept it quiet. Partly for protection, mostly for power. The difference between then and now was me. Back then I was afraid. Now I was in control. I wore loose dresses, drank peppermint tea, and let the world think I was just well-rested and vengeful. As I was both. And I had a plan. It began with small artifacts. A black and white photo slipped into Thomas's drawer. Us standing beside the fireplace during the New Year's gala, his hand protectively over my belly. The very week I'd found out I was pregnant the first time. In the cufflink case I tucked an old letter. I know you'll be a wonderful father. I'd written it once. I printed it again. It didn't need to be dated. Doubt doesn't need facts. It only needs silence. Thomas found them within days. I watched his expression shift across dinner. How his eyes flicked toward me when the conversation wandered. How he traced the rim of his wine glass like he was circling a memory he couldn't name. I didn't confront him. I didn't explain. Let the silence thicken. Let the guilt grow legs. Let him ask himself the question, what did I miss? Meanwhile, Ian was working behind the scenes. I got the call during a morning walk, the cold air biting my face as I paced the garden paths. You were right, he said, his voice low. I spoke to Coulson. Avery Coulson. The Moore family's estate lawyer. The man who finalized the forged will. The man whose hands smelled like guilt and $1,000 ink. He didn't hang up this time, Ian added. He told me Ava came to his office with pre-signed documents. She said Richard had verbally approved them and wanted them filed, without the usual red tape. When Coulson hesitated, she threatened to leak confidential client files and accuse him of embezzlement. I stopped walking. He has evidence, Ian said. Emails. Messages. Even a voicemail where she says, "Do this or your family will suffer." My hands were trembling, not from the cold. And he'll testify? Ian hesitated. He will. But not unless you grant him limited immunity through your legal team. He'll get it, I said. He'll get everything as long as he opens that door. Back at the estate, I found Ava in the baby's nursery, adjusting a silk blanket. She was humming. That's what struck me most. She hummed like everything was fine. Like the empire she built on manipulation wasn't days from collapse. Lovely day, I said as I entered. She glanced up, smiling tightly. Perfect weather for the naming ceremony. I've already arranged a floral arch, white peonies and hydrangea. Symbolic, I murmured. She tilted her head. Of burial, I said sweetly before walking past her. She didn't respond. But I felt her eyes follow me. That evening I slipped into Richard's old study, a room Thomas rarely entered anymore. It smelled like leather and old ambition. I pulled out the drawer he once kept locked. Inside I found 2 unopened envelopes I had hidden in my past life. One addressed to Thomas. One to my future. I smiled faintly. The past had a funny way of returning, if you gave it enough rope. I placed both envelopes beside his whiskey glass. Let him wonder. Let him drink over it. The next morning, Thomas cornered me in the corridor between the east wing and the greenhouse. "Elena," he said, his voice low, "what is this about?" I blinked innocently. "What's what about?" "The letters. The photos. The sonogram." So he'd found the sonogram too. I didn't flinch. "I'm just reminiscing. Don't you ever think about what we could have had?" His eyes searched mine. "Were you ever?" "I suppose you'll never know," I said softly. "And isn't that the punishment?" He looked shaken. I left him standing there with doubt wrapped around his throat like a silk tie. Meanwhile, the court had set the first hearing. Samuel sent the notice with a simple text. "They're officially on the record." But that wasn't all. Ian had arranged a private meeting between Coulson and a court mediator. Off the books, sealed behind confidentiality. That day, Coulson submitted a sworn affidavit confessing the will was not witnessed properly, and that Ava manipulated him under duress. He included screenshots, voicemails, a bank receipt, $75,000 transferred from one of the shell accounts Ava thought no one would find. The file was fire. The kind that burns empires down. That night, I lay in bed with a hand over my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for a fortune anymore. I was fighting for a future. For a child who would grow up unshamed. For a name that wouldn't be erased. For every version of myself that was ever told to be quiet for the sake of the family. No more. They tried to erase me. This time I'd carve myself into stone. The Moore Foundation's annual shareholders meeting was supposed to be a celebration. A victory lap for Ava's rebranding initiatives. A parade of polished forecasts and hollow smiles. Instead it became a battlefield. And I was ready to burn it down. I arrived 10 minutes before the first bell, dressed in deep navy, hair pinned into a sleek twist, the original will in my clutch and fire in my chest. As I walked through the entrance, the receptionist blinked like she'd seen a ghost. "Elena," she whispered. "You're not." "I'm not on the list," I finished, smiling politely. "That's about to change." 2 security guards stepped forward, hesitating as I flashed the court order from my bag. Stamped, signed, and sealed. My official reinstatement as a voting stakeholder. "The judge ruled my exclusion unlawful," I said calmly. "And I do believe it's illegal to obstruct a board member." They stepped aside. The doors opened. I walked into the lion's den. The meeting was already underway. Slides glowed on the screen. Projections. Graphs. Photos of Ava cradling the baby in tasteful lighting. Thomas sat at the head of the table, suit perfectly pressed, smile perfectly fake. Ava stood beside him, presenting a slideshow on ethical reinvention. I took the empty seat once reserved for me. Gasps rippled. Ava paused mid-sentence, her hand frozen over the clicker. Don't let me interrupt, I said, pulling out my flash drive. Though I do have a presentation of my own. Thomas rose. Elena, this isn't legal. Actually, it is, I replied, holding up the injunction. I was unlawfully removed from board oversight. This meeting can't proceed without full stakeholder attendance. He stared at the document like it might dissolve. I stood. And the room went silent. I won't waste your time, I said, plugging in the drive. You're about to see the truth behind this so-called ethical leadership. I tapped the keyboard. The first video began. Exhibit A, a screen recording of Ava's voice, clipped from a voicemail. Do this or your family will suffer. Gasps. Exhibit B, Coulson's affidavit scrolling across the screen. She handed me forged documents and said Richard had already agreed. He was sedated. Barely conscious. Murmurs turned into whispers. Exhibit C, email logs showing Ava wiring hush money from a shell account traced to her assistant. Exhibit D, security footage of her instructing staff to shred original copies of the will. I turned to the room. This isn't leadership. This is fraud. A beat of silence. Then chaos. One of the senior board members stood. Is this verified? It's already been filed with the probate court, I said, voice steady. I have hard copies here. And more will be submitted during the criminal investigation. Ava's voice cracked. This is slander. She's lying. This is her revenge. The doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room. Ava Langston? He took a step back. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, coercion, and obstruction of justice. Gasps filled the room as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She looked at Thomas wild-eyed. Do something. Say something. But Thomas didn't move. He didn't even look at her. Only at me. After the room cleared, Thomas approached. The chaos had emptied the boardroom. It was just us now, just like it used to be. Except everything was different. Elena, he said softly, like my name still belonged to him. You didn't have to do this. We could have worked through it. I stared at him. Worked through what? I asked. The gaslighting, the erasure, the child you let me lose. His eyes flickered just slightly. That wasn't Ava's fault. Wasn't it? He took a slow step forward. We were good once. You and me. Maybe we can be again. No boardrooms. No schemes. Just us. He reached out. I slapped him. Hard. He staggered back, stunned. You erased me once, I said quietly, eyes locked on his. I just rewrote your future. And I turned my back on him. That evening the media exploded. The Moore Foundation stock dipped 18% overnight. Ava's mugshot made national headlines. And Thomas Moore, once untouchable, was now the centerpiece of every financial scandal blog in the city. I stood in the penthouse balcony, watching the skyline blink in silence. My hand drifted to my stomach. Still my secret. Still mine. But now, mine on my terms. The empire they tried to build on my ashes? I just watched it collapse. Brick by brick. And I wasn't done yet. The Moore Industries board convened again 2 weeks after Ava's arrest. This time no one tried to block my entrance. They called me Ms. Moore again. But I corrected them. Elena Bennett, I said. And I'll be retaining my maiden name moving forward. That was the first change. The second. Every vote on the agenda passed with my signature. I had control now, real, legal, uncontested control. They couldn't write me out anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to them. The documents spoke louder than I ever could. The original will reinstated and honored. And my restored stake in the company, 41%. Or the trust my father-in-law had quietly built, left untouched by Thomas and Ava because they never knew it existed. Richard Moore hadn't just believed in legacy. He believed in me. And now I would honor him in return. By the end of the month, the foundation was established. The Richard Moore Women's Wellness Fund. Focused on postnatal care, fertility recovery, trauma-informed OB/GYN training. Funded entirely from the restored estate. I didn't wait for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I picked a site on the edge of the city. A sun-washed greenhouse on one side, clinic on the other. Vines curling around pale bricks. Lavender fields blooming just past the gate. It wasn't flashy. It was home. I moved in quietly. No press. No press releases. Only my name on the gate. Elena Bennett Foundation Center. And a small detail I didn't share with anyone. I was pregnant. So, and this time, I was ready. I didn't tell the press. Didn't tell the board. Didn't even tell Ian, until he showed up on a Saturday with a box of lemon tea, a crooked smile, and a look that told me he'd figured it out. You're glowing, he said, pretending not to know. New skincare. Sunlight and vengeance, I replied. He laughed, eyes crinkling. The best kind. We sat in the garden. Bees hovered lazily over chamomile blossoms. My tea steamed in the mug he brought. There were no lawyers. No chaos. No power struggles. Just us. Just peace. He looked at me after a long silence and said softly, I'm proud of you. Not angry. I was, for a while, he admitted. But then I realized, you weren't choosing revenge. I looked at him. You were choosing truth. Later that week I filed the final legal transfer documents. The nameplate outside the Moore building was changed. Not to mine. To the foundation's. Because I didn't need a crown. Just a purpose. The day the baby kicked for the first time I was in the greenhouse, tending to a row of white peonies. I pressed a hand to my belly. And smiled. They tried to erase me. Instead I planted something permanent. The end.